You are taking a live listen into a rally that is happening right now in Tel Aviv, Israel. These are people who have gathered at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, calling for the release of hostages being held in Gaza. You are also taking a live look at the Israel-Gaza border as it is nighttime. And we do want to give you the very latest in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war that is now in its 5th month. Israel is vowing to press ahead with its offensive in the southern Gaza Strip, despite warnings from the U.S. to work harder to protect civilians. Over the past few days, Israel's military has raided Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, which is the main hospital in the southern Gaza Strip, saying it had evidence that Israeli hostages had been held there. Now, it did not find any hostages, but it did say it arrested 100 militants, 20 of which claimed it had been involved in the attacks that started the war last October. A surgeon at the hospital said one patient had been killed in the raid. Now, the upcoming offensive on Rafah has also sparked warnings by neighboring Egypt, worried that the fighting would push Palestinian civilians into its territory. And in fact, it has threatened to suspend its peace treaty with Israel. It has also fortified a buffer zone on the border with another wall. Now, across the border with Israel is Lebanon, and fighting also heated up this week across that border. Rocket fire from Lebanon killed an Israeli soldier on Wednesday, and in response, an Israeli drone strike killed a Hezbollah commander and 2 other operatives in Lebanon. The next day, Israeli strikes killed 10 Lebanese civilians, prompting Hezbollah to fire a salvo of rockets into northern Israel and threaten to expand the conflict. Dr. Howard Stouffer is going to be joining us. He is a professor of national security from the University of New Haven. Dr. Stouffer, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So I do want to talk about everything that's been going on. And in fact, right now, live in Munich, Germany, world leaders have been at a conference in part discussing the ongoing Israel-Hamas war and security in the Middle East. At this point in time, again, the war is still in a regional area. But again, there is so much international input. You know, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I think the Munich Security Conference brings together leaders from all the countries in the world, and particularly in the Middle East. And you have there the Prime Minister of Qatar, which has been very instrumental in negotiating with Hamas, together with Egypt and the United States and with Israel. There had been that Cairo meeting about a few days ago, which didn't lead to a final framework, but it did settle a number of issues. The biggest issue in that particular meeting was how many Palestinians should be released and which Palestinians should be released in return for hostages being slowly released over a period of days and weeks in a pause. I think at the meeting in Munich, there is obviously some discussions going on because the Prime Minister of Qatar said that, hostages being released should not be the sole outcome of a pause. And of course, for the Israelis, the release of hostages is essential. There is really no agreement that they can reach that doesn't include having hostages released. Of course, you have other players that are all there, and I'm the Israeli hostage negotiator who is in Munich, even used Bibi's words again, unfortunately, when Bibi described Netanyahu described the last proposal that was put on the table by the 4 negotiating with Hamas as delusional. And then the coordinator said the same thing yesterday in Munich. So obviously there are discussions going on. The idea that you can just leave hostages behind, I think, has to be a central point that they can raise. But what if Israel has to decide what it's willing to pay for it? Apparently, what's going on in the Israeli government now is that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who are the 2 extremist settlers in the government and have government portfolios as finance minister and security minister, they are really, holding up Netanyahu being able to agree to some kind of a pause that would lead to more humanitarian aid, release of some Palestinian prisoners, and the return of the hostages over a period of time.
And we're taking a live look at Hostages Square. And as you can see, a massive amount of people right there calling for the release of hostages. You'd mentioned Netanyahu, and I have to imagine there is growing tension in Israel as it relates to how to navigate a potential ceasefire. Because, again, as he said, he is not going to be accepting any of these previous proposed ceasefires.
Well, that's a problem because the longer he delays some kind of an arrangement, the greater pressure from these groups of families and others that support them. And there are quite a few because every family that gets affected has at least 10 other people who are friends or family members. So you multiply that by, 100 hostages, 200 and 130 hostages, and you come up with a very large number of people directly impacted. You also have to remember that while no agreement is reached on a pause, there is continuing to be fighting in the north. There are 25,000 people at least that are out of their homes in the north, and the Hezbollah keeps firing. They just fired last night. They fired 25 missiles into Kiryat Shmona and destroyed some vehicles and a partial building. Israel is striking back. So that is an ongoing issue. And of course, the United States, has been attacking Houthi targets in Yemen, in Western Yemen, where they've been threatening shipping coming out of the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. So these elements are all, continuing and are heating up. I don't believe the Israelis can wait indefinitely to reach some kind of an understanding. But on the other hand, they are also planning to go into Rafah. How they will go in is a question mark because some people are leaving. There are some people trying to move north wherever they can go. I mean, Khan Yunis has, been somewhat destroyed, and further north, Gaza City has been more occupied and destroyed. But they need to leave Rafah before the Israelis can move in. If the Israelis create a large number of casualties in moving in, that's going to really get the United States, among many other countries, to basically say, you can't do that. You have to give us assurances. You go into Rafah that you will be able to minimize the number of civilian casualties. So the Israelis really have somewhat of a dilemma. They say they're planning on their operations. They're discussing it with their cabinet. Not today. Today is the Sabbath. I doubt they'll be doing it. But they're planning what their move into Gaza would be like, into Rafah would be like. And, one possible outcome would be they don't have to go in like all the other areas of Gaza. They can go in with special operations, use of intelligence, and then go for the tunnels, and fight in the tunnels, which they're willing to do now if they believe, the hostages are being kept in tunnels in Rafah, and the leadership are hiding in Rafah. So that's a strong motivation to continue. But there's also a strong pressure from people like these that are genuinely concerned, as well as people around the world concerned about Palestinian civilians and Israeli hostages.
Absolutely. And let's talk about the displaced Palestinians, because they really don't have many options as to where to go. Egypt's already taken a very strong stand, saying we don't want the Palestinians to come over to our border. In fact, has erected a wall. They have also warned Israel about the expansion into Rafah, saying that could jeopardize their 40-year peace treaty. Where do the Palestinians go?
Well, I don't think Palestinians want to go into Egypt. There have been, as you know, the border opened up for those severely injured and allowed to go to Egyptian hospitals, but that's a very small number of people. The Palestinians in Gaza want to go back to their homes. They don't want to go to Egypt, nor do the Israelis, at least from what Netanyahu says. He doesn't want, and Gallant is the defense minister, they don't want Palestinians to be leaving the Gaza area. There are the two criminals, which I mentioned earlier, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are members of the government. And, they would love to see the Palestinians forced out of Gaza and to repopulate the area with settlers. That is a completely outlandish and delusional, I will use Bibi's own words for describing what they want, delusional outcome. They're not going to be able to get settlers in there. That's just not going to happen. And the United States wouldn't sit by if they started pushing Palestinians out. Now, the Egyptians haven't just built the wall. There are now a series of barriers, more than one barrier. It's a series of barriers and then land in between the barriers. So it would be really difficult, I think, for any large number of Palestinians to force their way through That just won't happen. On the other hand, and I remember, many years ago when I was in the Sinai as a peacekeeper, that border was just, simply a few markers. There were no walls. There was nothing but a continuation of the desert. But these are different times, and the Egyptians know the Israelis. They basically know the Israelis have to go into Rafah, but they have to go in the correct and low-key manner. They can't just be bulldozing their way in as they have in Khan Yunis, in Gaza City, and in other parts of the Gaza Strip.
We've seen Israeli forces move from northern Gaza, now expanding into the southern area of Gaza, looking to expand into Rafah. Beyond that, what is their objective? Obviously, still to eliminate Hamas and free the hostages. But once they go into Rafah and that portion of the conflict winds down, I mean, you mentioned that there has to be an endpoint potentially as they continue this. What does that timeline look like? What does that strategy look like?
Well, here we are. It's now, February 17th. There are a couple of dates to keep in mind. On March 11th begins Ramadan, the holy month of Ramadan for the Islamic people. And so during that time, they fast from dawn till nightfall. And, it would be nice if there could be some kind of an arrangement worked out where there would be a pause during that period of time. And following that, in April, when the Ramadan ends with the Eid al-Fitr, you will have a Jewish holiday coming up, the holiday of Passover, which marks when the exodus of Israelites left Egypt and 3,500 years ago. And that holiday is observed by Jewish people everywhere in the world. So that'll be another 8 days that would be a Jewish holiday. I suppose it would be, wishful thinking to believe that some kind of a pause, some kind of an understanding could be reached. I would expect the Israelis keep their eye on the calendar and know that, during Ramadan, it'd probably be a lot more difficult to operate because people are going to be needing to eat no matter whether it's Ramadan or not. And I would think they want to try to get into Rafah as soon as they can, but they can't go in. There's still 1 million people, camped in this one place around a hospital down there. And these people will have to be facilitated and helped in order to move and for them to move into these areas in Rafah. Once they've been in Rafah, once they've checked many of the tunnels, once they're convinced the leadership is not hiding there, I don't know where they could be hiding. Once they know that there are no hostages any longer in those tunnels, I suppose it'd be a good time for Israel to just say, okay, we've accomplished what we can, or they can fall back on the proposal I've mentioned numerous times following the 1982 paradigm when Arafat was cornered in southern Lebanon or just outside of Beirut. He and his forces of the PLO were allowed to take a ship and leave. All of them were able to get on a ship and leave for Tunis and be dealt with for another day. And that might be the best way for the leadership of Hamas and their brigades that haven't been decimated yet by Israel to be able to be allowed to go to El Arish in the northern part of Sinai and get on a ship or a plane or ships or planes and leave for other places where they would be welcomed, like Qatar, for example.
Dr. Sofer, is there anything else that you would want to add? I mean, we've been continuing to listen to a lot of the commentary and the conversations out of Munich, Germany, as many world leaders continue to discuss what needs to be done in order to secure peace in the Middle East. Anything else that you really focused on, or anything else that you would want our viewers to know?
Well, I think the press has made more of a story out of the fact that Netanyahu and President Biden, are, sometimes not on the same page. President Biden is still supporting the Israeli operation in Gaza. However, he's calling for greater Israeli understanding of the need for humanitarian aid to come in and for the Israelis to be much more careful in their operations and not create casualties among civilians. I think there is also an ongoing discussion that there's not agreement at all about creating a Palestinian state. I mean, there's no harm in talking about where you want to be in, let's say, 5 years. And it could be a Palestinian state if there are all new leaders in the Palestinian side, both on the West Bank and in Gaza. and there'll be new leadership in Israel, because I don't foresee Netanyahu being around for another 5 years. I can almost foresee that there might be an election sometime later this year, because there is a huge number of Israelis. 80% of Israelis now seem to feel that Netanyahu has, outlived the time that he should be prime minister, and he should get on with defending himself in court on the 3 cases that are against him, and not keep using the war as a foil for not dealing with that. So there will probably be a change of leadership in Israel, as there will be among the people living in Gaza, but it will not be the Hamas leadership that started this war. They'll be somewhere. They'll either not be alive anymore, or they'll be traveling somewhere else, or they'll be captured. But so you're going to see a change of leadership soon. I can't really say when, but a matter of weeks or months, both in Israel and in Gaza.
All right, Dr. Stouffer with the University of New Haven. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on this Saturday.
Thank you so much, too.
Absolutely. And you